You think you know the people in your life, your family, your friends, your co-parents, until something happens that shakes the ground beneath you. When my teenage son ran away, I thought the worst was not knowing where he was. But the real shock came later, from someone I never expected. How well do we really know those we trust most? My son Caleb left home on a gray January afternoon. No dramatic argument, no slammed doors, just silence. One minute he was in his room, the next he was gone. At first, I told myself he'd cool off and come home in a few hours. Maybe he needed space. Maybe it was just a teenage thing. But hours turned into days and days turned into weeks. And now it's April. The last time I actually saw him was mid-February at a school event. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge I was there. Just kept his head down, surrounded by friends, like I was invisible. Do you know what it feels like to be a stranger to your own child? To stand in the crowd and watch him laugh while you wonder if he even remembers the sound of your voice. He doesn't have a phone anymore. Long story, one of those consequences we thought would help teach responsibility. I regret that decision every single day now. Without it, I have no way of reaching him. My only thread of sanity has been tracking his school attendance online. Every time I see that little check mark next to his name, I breathe just a little easier. At least he's showing up. At least he's safe enough to make it to class. But now it's spring break. No check-ins, no updates, no peace of mind. Just this deep, gnawing fear that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where he is. Is he warm? Is he eating? Is he safe? Or worse, is he somewhere he shouldn't be? How long can a mother go without hearing from her child before it breaks something inside her? Last Saturday, April 5th, I hit a wall. My husband, Aaron, was working, and I couldn't sit in the house another minute. So I drove to the home of one of Caleb's close friends, Mason. We'd taken him to the movies once. He'd had dinner at our house. I was nervous. Didn't want to seem like some unhinged woman pounding on doors, but I had to try. Mason's parents were kind. I'll never forget the look on the mom's face when she said, "Oh yeah, we saw Caleb earlier today. He stopped by to hang out for a bit." That moment, it was like a beam of sunlight cutting through fog. Relief, sharp and bright, washed over me. I wanted to cry and scream all at once. He was okay, at least for now. But it wasn't the kind of reassurance I'd hoped for. It was too brief, too incomplete. Where was he staying? Who was looking out for him? Why hadn't he come home, or at the very least, called? When did we become so distant that my own son wouldn't even reach out to let me know he was alive? I drove home with more questions than answers. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spiraling. That night, I poured everything out to Aaron. My anxiety, the helplessness, the guilt, all of it. He listened quietly, too quietly in hindsight, and then casually dropped a bombshell that would shake me even more. But that part of the story, I'll get to that in a moment. Tell me, have you ever thought the worst was behind you, only to find out the real betrayal was waiting just around the corner? Aaron sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck like he always does when he's about to say something uncomfortable. I was still pacing, rambling about how I couldn't sleep, how every time the phone buzzed I thought it might be Caleb, how even my dreams had started turning into nightmares. He just stared at the floor and said, "He stayed at Rachel's last weekend." I stopped cold. "Wait, what?" I blinked, thinking I must have misheard him. "Rachel? As in his ex-wife, Rachel? The woman I've co-parented with for the last 6 years? The one who comes over for birthdays and texts me holiday recipes. That Rachel?" He nodded like it was the weather. "Yeah, he crashed there Friday night. Ethan said he came over after school. She let him stay." I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. My heart beat loud in my ears. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. He knew. He knew, and he didn't tell me. Rachel knew. And she didn't tell me either. Do you know what it feels like to have the people closest to you keep something this huge from you? Not strangers, not acquaintances, but the very people you trust to help raise your children? I sank onto the bed and stared at the wall. Aaron tried to backpedal. "I thought I mentioned it," he said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Ethan was the one who told me, and I assumed Rachel would have already said something to you." Assumed. Why didn't anyone think that I deserved to know that my missing son had shown up? That he'd spent the night under someone's roof, not a friend's couch, not a stranger's basement, but the home of a woman I considered family? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Rachel has a son of her own. She knows what it's like to worry. She's seen me break down more than once since Caleb left. We've cried in the same room over these kids. And still, when Caleb showed up at her door, looking for what? Comfort? Escape? She said nothing. Not even a text. Why? Was she trying to protect him? Did she think I wouldn't understand? That I'd drag him back home against his will? I'm his mother. I deserve the chance to make that decision. At the very least, I deserve to know. I replayed it over and over in my head. Caleb showing up at her door, Rachel welcoming him inside, him eating her food, sleeping in her guest room, maybe even laughing with Ethan like nothing had happened. While I was home, praying for any sign he was okay. Is kindness still kindness when it blindsides the person who's suffering? The betrayal doesn't just sting, it burns. Not because she took him in, but because she kept it hidden. What was I to her, a friend, a fellow mom, or just a footnote in a family she thought she still had a say in? Aaron tried to smooth it over, said he'd talk to her, but the damage was done. Trust, once fractured, doesn't heal overnight. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, not because I was still anxious about where my son might be, but because I suddenly didn't know who I could count on anymore. Would you be angry too? Or would you tell yourself it was done out of love? The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window, my coffee untouched and cold in my hands. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Aaron had already left for work, and the house felt emptier than usual. Not because Caleb was gone, I'd grown used to that hollow space, but because now I wasn't sure who was standing with me in this anymore. Rachel. Her name echoed in my head like a whisper that wouldn't fade. I kept trying to justify her silence, to remind myself of all the ways she'd been kind to me over the years. She had brought me soup when I had the flu, helped organize Caleb's 8th grade graduation party, even stayed late after Ethan's birthday to help clean up. We weren't just connected by our children, we were friends, weren't we? But now all I could think about was the fact that she had looked my son in the eyes, taken him into her home, and never once thought to call me. How could she sit on that secret, knowing the state I was in? Why didn't she think I deserved the truth? I picked up my phone more than once that morning to call her, to ask what the hell she was thinking. But each time my finger hovered over the screen, then backed away. What would I even say? I didn't want to scream, though I felt like it. I didn't want to cry, though the lump in my throat had been sitting there for hours. Instead, I texted her, short, direct. Can we talk? She replied 10 minutes later. Of course, I'm free after 3. Come by? Come by, like it was just another Tuesday. Like we were still good. At 3:15, I pulled into her driveway, my hands tight around the steering wheel. Her house looked exactly the same as always. Flower boxes freshly planted, the wind chimes on the porch clinking softly in the breeze. I sat there for a moment before finally forcing myself out of the car. Rachel opened the door with a smile that faltered the second she saw my face. Hey, she said gently. I didn't return the greeting. I just walked past her into the living room. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want small talk. I wanted the truth. Why didn't you tell me he was here? Her shoulders dropped. I knew you'd be upset. That was it. That was her reason. I was already upset, Rachel. You knew that. You saw it. My voice cracked despite my best efforts. Do you have any idea what it felt like to find out from Aaron? Days later? She looked genuinely remorseful, but remorse doesn't erase decisions. He asked me not to tell you. He was afraid you'd come get him, and he didn't want to go back. He promised he was going to school, staying out of trouble. I stared at her in disbelief. And that made it okay to just leave me in the dark? You chose his trust over mine? She didn't answer. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't undo the damage. Trust is like glass. Once shattered, it never looks the same, even if you piece it back together. Would you forgive someone who chose silence over your peace of mind? Because in that moment, I wasn't sure I ever could. I left Rachel's house feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted again. Only this time, it wasn't grief or fear pulling me under. It was anger, a deep, simmering anger that made my hands tremble as I turned the ignition and backed out of her driveway. I didn't yell, I didn't cry in front of her, but inside I was unraveling. How many people had known where Caleb was before I did? How many quiet conversations had taken place behind my back while I paced my kitchen or stared out the window at night, hoping for a sign? Who else had been keeping his whereabouts a secret under the guise of respecting his wishes? When did everyone decide I wasn't part of the equation anymore? Is this what motherhood becomes, being slowly cut out of your child's world while everyone around you plays gatekeeper? That night, I sat in Caleb's room. It was still just the way he left it. Bed unmade, guitar leaning against the wall, a hoodie draped over his chair. I sat on the edge of his bed and held one of his old soccer medals, the kind they give out at those little rec leagues just for showing up. He used to wear it around the house like it was Olympic gold. How did we get here? Where did I lose him? We used to talk, really talk. He'd tell me about his teachers, his friends, what made him laugh, what made him mad. We'd make pancakes on Sunday mornings and sing horribly off-key to songs on the radio. But somewhere along the way, those conversations faded. He got quieter, more withdrawn, and I let it happen, telling myself it was just part of being a teenager. But what if I was wrong? What if I missed something bigger? Aaron came home late and found me sitting there. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Eventually, he walked in and sat down next to me. "I know you're angry," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He reached for my hand, and I let him hold it, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. "I should have told you the second I found out," he continued. "I thought maybe Rachel had already said something, and when I realized she hadn't, I froze. I didn't know how to bring it up without making things worse." "Worse for who?" I asked, finally meeting his eyes. "Because it was already hell for me." He nodded. "I know, and I'm sorry." Wait, it wasn't enough, not yet, because sorry didn't change the fact that Caleb had reached out to someone, not me, when he needed a place to stay. Sorry didn't undo the fact that two of the people I trusted most had decided I wasn't part of the plan anymore. What does that say about the way they see me? What does that say about how Caleb sees me? The hardest part of all of this isn't just the betrayal or the silence. It's the fear that maybe somehow I've failed, that I've become the kind of mother a child runs from. Not to, and if that's true, how do I come back from it? The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I wrote Caleb a letter. I didn't know where to send it. I wasn't even sure if he'd ever read it, but I needed to say the things I couldn't say to his face, things I should have said sooner. I poured my heart onto the page, my handwriting shaky but honest. I told him I missed him, that I was scared, that no matter what had happened between us, no matter how angry or distant he felt, I was still his mother, and I would always be here. I told him he could come home, not to be scolded or guilted into anything, not to be lectured or punished, just to be safe, to be held if he wanted that, to sit in silence if that's all he could manage. Just home. And then I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, because I still didn't know where he was. Rachel reached out the next day. She called instead of texting. That in itself felt like a white flag. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Her voice was quiet. "He came by again, just for a few minutes. He didn't stay." I swallowed hard. "Did he say anything about me?" A pause, then he asked if you were okay. Those 6 words broke something open inside me. It had to sit down. He was still thinking about me, even if he couldn't bring himself to call, even if he was angry, even if he felt like I didn't understand him anymore. Somewhere in that teenage heart of his, he still wondered how I was doing. "Next time," I whispered, "please tell him I love him and that I want to see him. No pressure, no expectations, just if he wants to." Rachel said she would, and for the first time since our falling out, I believed her. After we hung up, I sat with the quiet again, but it felt different this time. Less like a void, more like a space waiting to be filled. Like maybe, just maybe, the silence wasn't the end of our story. That weekend, I did something small but important. I went to the grocery store and bought the ingredients for Caleb's favorite dinner, lasagna. I hadn't made it since he left. I didn't know if he'd be home. I didn't even know if he'd ever come back. but I needed that casserole dish in the oven. I needed the scent of garlic and tomatoes and melted cheese to fill the house again, if only to remind myself that I hadn't given up. Not yet, because sometimes hope isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a warm plate on a table waiting. A porch light left on, a letter tucked away in a drawer, ready to be handed over when the time is right. Do I still feel hurt? Yes. Am I still angry? Some days more than I'd like to admit, but I've realized that being a mother doesn't stop when your child pulls away. That love doesn't end just because it isn't returned in the way you expect. It endures. It waits. It forgives. So now every night I light that porch lamp and I tell myself, maybe tomorrow. Because no matter how far he's gone, this will always be his home. What would you do if your child ran away and someone you trusted hid that they'd seen him? Would you feel betrayed, heartbroken, or try to understand their silence? The woman in this story is still holding on to hope, even while her heart aches. If her story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every click tells her she's not alone, that people out there care, that her pain is heard. Your support means the world. It's not just about a story, it's about standing with someone who feels like the world forgot her. Let her know you're here.